And of course, probably if you saw this painting is listed as a doable painting because it's a little bit more than just an easy painting where you're just copying. Succulents vary. You're allowed to change a lot of colors in this painting. So I'm definitely going to share my tips and tricks for doing succulents, but it's almost like building a bouquet. There's a lot you can change. There's a lot you can alter in it. So that's why it doesn't get labeled as just easy because I think it allows you to be creative, which sometimes can be challenging and sometimes you make mistakes and you can fix things, but that's the best part. It's like creating a puzzle. There's going to be some tough parts, but once you work through it, you're going to finish the puzzle. So we'll work through all that together. And you can do your portrait landscape or portrait for this piece. It works both ways, so it's absolutely fine. I'm just doing portrait tonight because it fits on my desk a little bit better with the camera because I have to switch cameras a little bit. I'm going to swing into us color blocking, which just means we're going to start building up the understudy, which is sketching with paint. And the trick is to make sure your canvas is wet. Gesso can be a little bit thirsty when you start painting your canvas. So the first thing you want to do while your water is clean before we start mixing or doing anything else is dampen the surface of your canvas. This helps the paint glide around like melted butter for you. So if you notice your paint has a lot of resistance, you definitely want to wet the surface first because you can also erase paint if it's damp. So I'm gonna grab a big brush because I just want to get this shape out onto this canvas because like I said, it's kind of like color blocking the first few things. I just want to get a log and a background. And so the log is very much so driftwood and it's aged, so it has a little bit of a charcoal tone to it. So I'm going to take a big brush because I got all this space to cover, and we're just going to work on the background, which I'm going to do a neutral tone. Probably you notice in the painting it's very pale, like a beige or an eggshell color, so I'm going to use that. And if you don't have anything like an eggshell, I just usually take a little bit of my brown and my white and make me a sand color. Especially if you have a warmer color, you're going to get a nice warm sand tone or a warm beige tone to use. So what I would do is just kind of make up the shape, so you don't have to really worry about drawing. It's just more like starting off of a rectangle and editing it a little bit. So here's my brown, so I'm going to take a pinch of black, and mine's is very much so like a gray black, and I'm just going to get my wet brush a few kind of passes through the paint to make sure I evenly mix that. And then I just take a little bit of white, so it's kind of like adding gray to your brown will make it look like charcoal, because you want ash tones, which is what the white will give it, and you want those shadow tones, which is what the black's going to give it. So you just want to mix until you have a driftwood color that you're happy with. And I would use brown, black, and white so that we get all those elements in one color. And I'm just loading up my brush and making sure it's damp. And if your paint's a little stiff, you can always add more water directly to your paint on your plate before you go to your canvas. Good rule of thumb is, you go straight from your cup to your plate and then your canvas so you can avoid drips. I'm going to put my driftwood towards the bottom part of my canvas. So I'm going to be below half. So just find half on your canvas, and that's where your driftwood should sit. So I'm just going to go ahead and put a bottom. And it's okay for just to kind of start off as basic as an equal sign, and then we're going to go into it. So there's a piece of driftwood just to start it. So I just did a bottom and a top. And then I know I want some pieces coming up, like a little stump coming up off of it. So I'm just going to do 2 lines to draw a stump as well. And I'm going to pause right there before I keep going, because I'm going to start building up the textures of this log. So I'm just not going to fill it in like with a few brush strokes. I'm going to do a few things to help set it up. And what I want to do is, because I don't want to draw too much, I really want to just kind of create the textures that we see and the vein marks and everything, is I want the edges to be a little jagged and broken. So what I'm going to do is make sure my brush strokes are jagged and broken. So I'm just going to go to the edges and do very short brush strokes, pulling in towards my driftwood. So I'm just going on the edges and pushing down on my brush very slightly to get some jagged pieces of wood. And what I do to start building up veinage is, it's like painting stripes for wood. So what we're going to do is, in these negative zones of white space, I'm actually going to mix a slightly lighter color to fill in the rest of my piece of driftwood. And then once you have your darker lines done on your driftwood, I would just get a pinch of white and lighten the color you're using right now to fill in the rest of your trunk. And see, this is why I have my white separated, because I'm already getting one pile completely used up with this mixing. So I got a little bit of an ash tone mix now, and I'm just going to fill in the rest of these little negative spaces that I left behind to give that wood grain look. So that way we have dual colors. We're going to have lights and darks. We're going to do one more fade to this wood, but before we do that, I wanted to let it set up a little bit. And so we're going to move to our background in a moment. And we just want a natural tone. So you can even do grays or dusty pink. Anything that's a very nice natural light tone would be great for the background. So feel free to have fun with that as well. And like I mentioned, that's the difference between some of my, what you kind of label as the easy classes and the ones that we say are like doable, is that they kind of give you some space to be more creative, so you don't have to be matchy-matchy. You can challenge yourself and do something a little bit different to make it a little bit more original. I'm just going to start filling in my background. I know it's tempting, but unless you're going to spray seal the canvas, and so that way moisture doesn't escape, plastic kind of has plastic qualities, acrylic paint. So you just want to make sure you, even if it's something white, you can still add texture, and there is still a different look and appearance to the parts of your canvas that are going to be acrylic. So I'm going to take my sand tones, and I'm going to go ahead and paint in my background. I'm going to do some very flat brush strokes because I want a lot of the texture to honestly be where the succulents are in the wood. Make them my point of interest, but I'm just going to sweep in my beige tones. And again, if you can think of another neutral light tone to use for your backgrounds, you can do that instead. And when you get close to your edges, you just work the opposite motion that you did to draw the driftwood. So you don't have to worry about hurting the wood or anything like that. We're going to outline it again to give it one more shadow tone in black. So we're still just working at the understudy and really just getting color tones and things. We'll sharpen up certain details later on. So we just really want to make sure we get the right colors and fill and color block where these background colors are going. And I just cleaned off that big brush because I'm going to go down in size just to give you a heads up. And I'm still going to be probably working with my sharp edges just because due to the nature of these subjects. So I'm going to be using flats. So I would definitely have like an 8 or a 6 flat, just something still sharp. And we're just going to have some fun putting some succulents in. It's just like putting together a bouquet, only they're got thorns. To go ahead and just touch up the bottom part, I want to make it darker. So I like how light it looks at the top, plus that's where we're going to do the succulents, so I don't want to use black at the top of my canvas. But I am going to take a little bit of an espresso-like color, and I'm just going to go ahead and make some darker shadows on the bottom part of this driftwood. And again, do not do these darker shadows at the top part of your canvas. So I'm just mixing a shadow tone to help it look like it's sitting into the sand and that there's a bottom and that it's curved. And I think the very first one I'm going to do, I'm going to start us off easy and do some curvy triangular shapes and pull off that aloe vera because it is behind things. So I'm going to do that one first. So that's just what I mentioned about if you make green and you add a little brown to it, is how I would describe it. And with this one, I would recommend a flat. And I'm going to kind of tell you which one I'm using for it. I kind of switch brushes depending on what type of desert plant I'm working on first. But what I would do is mix yourself some green, which is blue and yellow. And of course, you're going to get a pretty bright green depending on how much you use. And what I usually do is tone this down by mixing some of the gray or some brown into it. So I'm just going to grab the brown since it's right there. And I'm just going to go until I get like an olive tone. So the brown helps to bring that green down. The white helps to give it a little bit of a lighter tone. So I make green and then add brown and white to it, and you're going to get some of these olive tones. And what you want to do is now make a shadow color for your succulent, which is just adding black or more blue to the exact same color, so you have both. So you want a shadow tone and its bright regular color. Well, there's a deeper green I have right here, so I'm just going to use both. And the most important thing too is this color has a little bit of white in it, and white acts like a little bit of a primer when I'm painting. Helps me paint in front of darker colors. So I'm going to go ahead and take this color because I think I paused and played with it enough. Okay, go all day with mixing. But I have a flat brush, and what I would do is just go to the left-hand side where I'm going to go right on the a little far away from this driftwood piece, but it doesn't matter which side as long as it's centered, so you have plenty of room. What I'm going to do is just push down on my brush, and I want you to make sure your brush is really loaded up so you can pull off these long brush strokes. And what I'm going to do is pull up, and I'm going to do like a tapering effect. So I'm going to get slightly taller as I go. And there's a third, and then I'm going to move out another piece. So it's going to look like a sea anemone for a second. And there's another piece of my aloe vera and another one. And what you do is after you have these ones, I'm going to pause and let you get those. And then we're going to turn each one of those into a rounded triangular shape. But this is part of like how you plan and control where something's going to go and the size of it. So I usually aim for height and distance first, but I wanted to make sure it had a nice tapering effect. So I want the longest ones in the middle and the shorter pieces of the aloe vera on the sides. And I just push down on my brush, so it's a flat brush, but you can get a little bit of roundness and sharpness from the same brush. So when I want a sharp tip, I just kind of tiptoed, and as I push down, my brush strokes got wider, so I'm going to show that again. If you want thin brush strokes with a flat brush, you barely push on it. But as you add pressure, your brush strokes will get a little bit wider as you go towards the bottom. So you're going to widen them up that way. So I'm going to show that 4 more times. So I put my brush at the end of one of those parenthesis marks, and I start off with a little bit of pressure, and then I add until it gets wider. And see how my base is slowly filling itself in. So I'm going to start at the edge of this one because I want it to be nice and pointy. So I start off very thin. I drag down a little bit, and then I push until it gets a little bit wider. And then I'm going to do it on this one again. And then I just had to reload my brush. So I start off very skinny, and then I push down on my brush to make it wider. And that way, you don't want to stop. You don't want to do short brush strokes because you will see them. That's one thing about acrylic paint. It's really easy to create texture, but it's also easy to get some accidental texture. So make sure you finish the stroke. Don't stop halfway. Keep going all the way till you get to the bottom again. Because I promise you, you probably look back at your canvas and see every time you stopped or picked up the brush. So I'm going to try and keep mine very smooth. And then I'm going to go to my little one now and hit that one as well. And so there's my aloe vera plant. I'm going to make this one a little bit wider, and I'm just pushing down on my brush and going all the way up to the tip. And there I go. Remember, we're going to get to detailing, but we're going to get the shape of these plants on here first. Just color blocking and building up some shapes to work with. Now, after you have these lighter tones, what you want to do is go ahead and sweep in some of your darker tones. So this is over here, where I scooped up a little bit of my color and made a darker color to go in front of it. So I'm going to take this darker tone now. I'm going to paint some shadows. So I would start your shadows from the bottom and then stretch them upwards towards the top. And this helps to create the illusion of space in between each of these pieces of aloe vera. So put some in front, some behind. So I'm just taking my brush, doing the exact same brush stroke, but with a darker color and less of it. And I'm starting from the bottom this time instead of from the top. And then once I have each one of the pieces done, I'm just going to go to the bottom and just put in some shadows. And sometimes if you feel like when you do more than one, that there's a lot of texture or some transparencies, that's something to bookmark because you might want to let the paint dry a little bit before doing another layer to try and fix that. So if you're not happy with the opacity level or anything, or you did a few thin passes, that's something you can fix later on. You can touch that up. So we're just concentrating, make sure it's the right color and the right shape. Just want to let everybody finish up their aloe vera that they're happy with. And of course, aloe vera plants vary, so yours is thicker, thinner, mine's that is absolutely fine. And I'm just touching up some of my edges. And so I'm going to go ahead and start my next flower. Just wanted to pause, let everyone happy with their aloe veras. So for the big succulent, and more also known as the desert roses, I'm going to go ahead and mix a light tone. So again, succulents come in every color. You really you can't get them too wrong as long as you're picking like a blush tone, a lighter tone. They even come in some very dark tones at times. So you could do a dusty red tone like this. I could also take a peach tone as well. I'm gonna do peach tones, and peaches is just pink with a little bit of yellow added to it. So I'm not going all the way orange, hanging out more on the pink side. So I'm going to show you how I do this one with this rosy color. So I'm going to take my brown brush and I'm going to load up a nice size, pretty thick medium round brush. And the most important thing is to start for a succulent. So again, all the succulents are kind of from a different angle. So I'm going to do this one, the very biggest one, so you can definitely see my brush strokes. So the first thing you want to do is a teardrop. And teardrops are just pushing down on your brush and then pulling up very slowly. So that way you get a very pointed edge and then one side that's thicker. And you want to do 3 teardrops. So there's 1, 2, 3. So you do 2 kind of like the letter V and then 1 in the middle. And you just want to make some teardrop shapes. So again, that's 1 right here. Got another one right here and another here. And like I mentioned with the other color, white's like primer, so it's a trick into painting over something dark like the charcoal would. So colors like yellow by itself, for example, might be too transparent to show up in front of driftwood that's that dark. So you might have to add a little bit of white to them to help out with the. And after you have 3 teardrops, I'm going to just pick up my round brush again. I'm just going to make sure it's nice and loaded, that dusty pink color, and you just want to get slightly bigger with your petal shapes. So what we're going to do is just go on the sides, and I'm just going to come out a little bit and do some medium-sized ones, and I'm just going to go right underneath it. So it might look like a lily to you for a second, but it's just a departure point, just a start. So there's a second petal, and I'm just making them slightly big, and they're still rounded. And then what I'm going to do is just come up here, and I'm not completely filling it in, so I can still see there's a little bit of a gap space between a teardrop and the next petal, because I'm going to put some shadows in between everything. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 medium-sized petals, and I'm doing them all in the same color, and I just left a gap in between them because we're going to go back in between these with a secondary color, which will just be a shadow tone or a deep red tone. So there's more. And then I'm just going to do one more big one to the side. And that'll close off the bottom part for me. And then what I'm going to do is come up underneath this one for some of these big ones. So I'm going to point this one towards me, so like the petal's falling open. So I'm just doing one petal at a time, and now I'm working with my big ones. I'm going to put another big one on this side, and there is some gaps in between. So I'm just leaving them nice and big. And what I'm going to do is put my big brush to the side, because what you want to do after you're finished, instead of trying to do like the fill-in with the same size brush, I would get a smaller brush, like a 2 or a 3, and load this up, and I would just grab a little bit of red and darken the color that you were just using, and this will become my shadow color. And I'm just going to go and outline all of these petals I just did with their shadow. And so you see I'm just going around my big one. I'm just going to start on the outside and work my way in, so that way you can identify each petal, which is why I left a slight gap in between everything. And I'm finding them, because then I can touch up, if I want to, a second coat of pink later in the middle sections. But I'm going to clean up the out part first, those outer edges. And I'm just going to work my way up to my other petals, and I'm going to keep sharpening the edges as you go around. So the most other thing you want to make sure you're doing is sharpen up the edges of this plant. That's why we're doing a shadow color, and I'm making sure to do very sharp edges on each one. And then there's going to be shadows inside of the succulent too coming out. So I'm just going to start wiggling in some shadows here too. And now I'm going in to fill in my dusty pink petals. So if I have any gaps left that weren't filled in by shadows, or if I just want to touch up the softer pink, I can. And just to demonstrate a smaller one for you, which was going to go a little bit quicker since it is smaller. Like I mentioned too, I would just be using whatever your roundest brushes are, filberts and rounds, and I would just have more than one size. So when you do a smaller succulent, you just want to switch size brushes. And I'm just going to take some blue this time and scoop some white. Maybe pop a little bit of yellow into it to make a bright color, or turquoise color, or ocean themed color. And I'm just going to go ahead and lay in a few small ones just to show you how more simplified they get the smaller they get. But you can just push down and make those teardrops. And if you have a cluster, you can actually just hop around and put in a few teardrops. So there's one right here. I'm just going to throw in a few. So that's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And then you just mix a little bit more blue into the color you were just using and deepen it. And then instead of having to redraw each one, you just keep adding in a slightly darker petal color. So now I'm going to start adding in my medium tone ones. And so I just did medium leaves around this one. And I'm just pushing down on my brush to create that petal shape, which is a lot easier since you don't have to pull the brush as far in order to create these shapes. So there's another one on the side of this brush. And do note I did have white in there, that's why these are showing up so bright. Without it, it might still show up, but you want that color to pop really on the driftwood. So I'm just making a slightly darker blue again. And just going right in and making some slightly bigger petal shapes as I go around. So there's another small one. Just going to mix a little bit more dark blue. It's going back towards light again. Especially if you already have a deeper blue like a navy or something. This is why I was like, if you had more than one blue, you could use it to your advantage in this painting. And really play with your lights and darks and just switch with them. So I'm just going to keep going. And I'm just doing side petals and then a few that fall open. So you can always see the ones that fall open pretty clearly, but there's quite a lot of layers to a succulent. So these ones are a little bit more abstracted and you can keep them simpler, and you can even tilt them in other directions. So I can have the bottom up on this one if I wanted to, or this one over here. Here's my next little big one, and I just spread out my clusters just like that. They didn't have to be baby blue, but the key thing was just make sure light, dark, light, dark. But these ones are a little bit more abstract, just so, and also closer to the plant, so I don't have to put in as many re-outlines and everything. Just the fact that I'm using different blues, one lighter, one darker, gives it enough contrast that it looks like smaller succulent plants. And then painting illusion is a very powerful thing if you can use to your advantage. And like I mentioned too, it's almost like building your own bouquet too, so just have fun with it. Pick the colors that appeal most to you. I'm clearly biased and love blue. And if you this one's going to sound a little bit simpler, this next one. These ones I just kind of tapped them out. So if you get a brighter green made, that's mainly just, when you make a lime green, you just want more yellow than blue, so it comes out a little bit brighter. And I'm just going to do some garland plants for a minute before I do some bigger succulents. And you want to just dab these in. They look just like Christmas garland. I mean, like rings of circles, attached circles. And so what you want to do is kind of just go underneath my big succulents and just dab for circles. You can use the back of the brush to get really small circles as well. So I dab with the front part for the big ones, and then I just flip my brush around and use the back of the brush to tap in the smaller dots, because you're going to get a perfect circle every time you use the back of your brush because it's mimicking the shape of your brush. So I'm just going to put in some garland and some lime green into this painting to help brighten it up. So instead of sunlight, we got garland. So I'm going to add in a yellow one actually just to switch it up, because that will also do it. But like I mentioned, it could be green, purple, lavender, yellow. I'm just doing one more big one just to balance it out. So I'm just going to go ahead and start off my pattern the same way I did with the other ones, but I'm going to churn it a little bit. Like I mentioned before, they don't have to lay flat. So I have one that's kind of sitting upright, one's on their side. You can also look straight down into a succulent too. So for that one, you just do a teardrop. You might like this one more. I always get people that pick like what I think is the hardest one. Sometimes it's what someone told me. That's the easiest one. So I'm going to take the yellow and I'm going to work in a circle this time with my pattern. So there's one leaf. And again, this is like if you were looking down into a succulent. So I do 1, 2, 3 on the outside of it. And I'm just going to keep working in a circle. So I did a teardrop. I did another teardrop, one more, and another. And then I'm going to get bigger and bigger as I work, and then pointier as I go. So this one's going to be pointier, like you're making crescent moon shapes is the best way to look at them. So I'm going to make another crescent moon over here, and I'm just going to keep streaking these in one at a time. I'm going to make another crescent moon on this side, and then I'm going to keep getting pointier too with the edges every time I stretch out. So I'm going to make another one, and another one, and then another crescent moon. And so that's looking down into a succulent is the difference with this one. And all I gotta do now is just point out my edges a little bit more too. You're gonna see the sharpness in this one a little bit better since it's not from the sides. But again, I just like the variety of this piece. Now after I got these nice pointy petals, and I just had to remake my color and pause for a moment to get those going. Got a nice lemony yellow color going. And then now I just get to do what I did with this other one, is go ahead and fill in the shadow with a slightly deeper color. So not technically always darker, just deeper. And so I'm going to take a little bit of brown and yellow and make a slightly darker color. And then I'm just going to fill in my gaps. So this one's just, like I said, it looks like crescent moons going around in a circle. There's my shadows marked in, and then I can take, because this is just a yellow one this time, I can actually just use white as well to help sharpen the edges since it matches so well. So now I'm just going around sharpening like I did with the other big one, which is a step you skip with the smaller ones.